until they met Jesus. He found only one grandson whom he rescued, together with another child.
He experienced the death of his brothers. He saw them being starved by their parents. And that's a story that you will never forget. You will never forget. So he knew that was next, but he was lucky. He was rescued.
When Stephen heard about the rescued children, he went and showed them his family's picture. They identified all members of Stephen's family. Then came the crushing news.
They told me my children, Jacob, Lillian, and Angelina, and others, about 10 children are buried in the same grave. They said when they were rescued from the forest, they left Helen and Samuel and other children being starved.
After children, women were the second group to be forced to starve. We meet one of the women survivors. She seems lost in thought. She watches chicken roam around her compound as she cuddles her 1-year-old. She was pregnant with her when she went to Shakahola.
It was difficult for us. Imagine 6 men gang raping you. They would pick us in turns. It was a church initially, but preaching stopped, and they started raping and killing people.
Mackenzie has told the court he never forced anyone to starve. Some of his followers still believe in his teachings. But to families that lost their kin, the pain they now have to live with is immeasurable.
And that was Anne Soy reporting from Kenya. This is NewsHour, live from the BBC with me, Tim Franks. For several days now, we've been waiting to hear how Hamas might respond to the latest internationally brokered proposal for a halt to the fighting in Gaza to coincide with the release of Israeli hostages. Well, shortly before we came on air, there was a hint of optimism, or at least of movement. The Prime Minister of Qatar's the country which has been playing a major role in these complex negotiations, announced that Hamas had delivered a positive response to the deal on offer. The Prime Minister at a news conference in Doha was the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who said he'd be taking that response now to Tel Aviv.
I'll be discussing it with the government of Israel tomorrow. There's still a lot of work to be done, but we continue to believe that an agreement is possible and indeed essential, and we will continue to work relentlessly to achieve it. We're also determined to use any pause to continue to pave a diplomatic path forward to a just and lasting peace and security for the region. That is the best way to ensure that October 7th and the tragic loss of life by Israelis and Palestinians is not repeated.
What chances then of a deal in the short term and indeed maybe even in the longer term, a wider, more lasting peace, which the US and many other Western countries are once again trying to talk up. Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Washington-based think tank, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's also a very experienced former Middle East negotiator at the State Department. Very good to have you back on the program, Aaron David Miller. Difficult to know exactly what the terms of this proposed deal is and you know what Hamas's response might be, but there's been a lot of chatter about possibly 6 weeks pause and a release of some hostages. What do you think the chances are?
Nobody. Thanks for having me, Tim. Nobody ever lost money betting against Arab-Israeli peace, and certainly not against Israeli-Palestinian peace. So I think these negotiations really have demonstrated they have 2 speeds, slow and slower. And I think initial optimism, has been somewhat constrained by the reality that neither Benjamin Netanyahu nor Hamas, in my judgment, are looking for a quick deal. And I also think that there are significant obstacles. The numbers of Palestinian prisoners that Hamas will demand, the ones with blood on their hands, including the release of Marwan Barghouti, probably the most credible Palestinian leader in the West Bank and Gaza today, serving 5 lifetime sentences for murdering 5 Israelis and a Greek national. And from Mr. Netanyahu's point of view, even if the Israelis agree to a cessation of hostilities, and they might, they're not going to give up their objective of identifying, finding, and killing Hamas's senior leadership. So there's no trust. These negotiations are being brokered indirectly, not even proximity to us. One wonders exactly how Hamas is communicating to its external leadership and whether the Israelis are listening very carefully to try to identify where these communications are actually going. So I think it's certainly possible Netanyahu's under a lot of pressure from the hostage families. Hamas may be under military pressure, but I think it's still a tough lift.
Yeah. Well, in which case it makes it all the more remarkable that there has been so much talk recently about somehow trying to, out of this, engineer some sort of grand bargain to bring a much wider resolution of the conflict. I mean, talk about the Saudi normalization of ties with Israel, about a grand end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, about, I mean, the UK Foreign Secretary talking about possibly recognizing a Palestinian state as some sort of precursor to all that. I mean, it's remarkable in the context of what you're saying.
It is, but you know, Tim, it's interesting because every breakthrough in the Arab-Israeli arena, without exception, has been preceded by terror, war, and insurgency. So there is an argument that pain as a way of disrupting the status quo. The real question is, can the pain be accompanied by the prospects of gain? And talk about a heavy lift in Israel-Hamas. This is going to be even heavier because it involves bilateral assurances the U.S. is going to provide to Saudi Arabia, a mutual defense treaty, support with their nuclear program. They want to control their own fuel cycle, which is a serious issue for our non-proliferation policy. They want to do this quickly. They want this done by the summer, obviously, because the president is facing one of the most consequential elections, I think, in American history in November. They want it done quickly. So even if they got the bilateral assurances through Congress, then you have the heavy lift, what the Saudis actually expect and want from the Israelis, and whether this Israeli government can actually do what Tony Blinken today said. He talked about a time-bound, quote, time-bound, irrevocable steps toward a Palestinian state. Current Israeli government can't handle that. And even a new government headed by Benny Gantz, which is still going to be center-right, is going to have a tough time meeting Palestinian needs and requirements on Jerusalem and refugees on borders, particularly in the wake of October 7th. So you need leadership to pull this wagon, Tim. And I think that leadership may be present in Washington. I think the president really is serious about this. The question is whether Israelis and Palestinians are.
The question, well put, and Aaron David Miller, we're very grateful to you for your time.
Thank you, Tim.
We started the program talking about one natural disaster, an earthquake whose aftermath has been exacerbated arguably by human failures. We're now going to look at another natural disaster. Extreme weather events are a disaster we think of as natural, and certainly the current and regular El Nino climate phenomenon, along with the man-made damage from climate change, is contributing to the absolute lashing that the western edge of the Western Hemisphere is currently enduring. In Chile, more than 120 people are known to have died, hundreds more are missing, as wildfires have consumed swathes of the drought-ridden coastal region of Valparaiso. Up in California, torrential rains have wrought havoc with landslides and flooding across the state. This man described what he'd seen in Los Angeles.
Oh my gosh, it was like thunder, like, and then the sound of trees, I thought, snapping like twigs, and it was just this house, just completely disintegrating. See that naked space right back up there? That house was there. And that naked spot is the mud that came down and pushed the house off of its foundation and into the road.
Those roads have also been inundated, flooded, as this driver found to his cost as he lost control of his car.
I tried to grip on it, and I felt the car starting to, like swerve around, and that's when the guy hit me, and then I completely swerved around.
The mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, tried to offer this reassurance.
We anticipate the rains for a couple of more days, but know that we are not standing alone in our city. I have been in regular communication with our governor. Vice President Harris has reached out to us to let us know on the federal level and on the state level they are there, they are with us, they are standing by, and will be helpful with anything that we need.
Back in Chile, meanwhile, a 10-year drought followed by a heat wave has led to the worst wildfires which has been seen in the country in ages. They've devastated